there's no bigger question on Earth. How do we sustain life without destroying the planet? Which brings us to permaculture. This sustainable farming concept was spawned by the oil crises of the 1970s. The two men involved were David Holmgren and Bill Mollison. Most followers would admit that Holmgren's contribution to permaculture has been greatly overshadowed by the higher profile Mollison. But maybe not for much longer. With future oil shortages looming, Holmgren is stepping out of the shadows to give permaculture a new and urgent relevance.
It's a scene befitting a parable from the Old Testament. The herdsman shepherding the goats, which in turn feed he and his family.
You going, Beth? Yeah. Ooh, that turns.
But David Holmgren is no prophet, wandering stoically in the wilderness. His tangle of trees, most notably the high-yielding tree lucerne, form the cornerstone of a vivid demonstration of the worldwide movement known as permaculture, which he co-founded some 26 years ago.
It's a prime tree fodder. It's 24% protein. It's, that's why it's called tree lucerne in a way, is the name for it. And it's one of the major feeds that we feed our milking goats. But at the same time, we're cutting back the tagasasti or tree lucerne. It's also releasing nitrogen from the roots, which makes that more available to the fruit trees that we have planted between. So by cutting it back and keeping it down, we're allowing the fruit tree canopy to be dominant. So before we had goats, we used to just use that material as mulch around the trees.
Permaculture seeks to harmoniously combine elements of nature so that the land can provide in a much more sustainable manner than permitted by conventional land use.
We've got about 120 fruit and nut trees that produce a substantial surplus, but we're basically just providing for our own needs from the property with extensive gardens and orchards. The goats are our dairy supply and some meat. So we're doing a sort of mixture of things that's definitely, we're not commercial producers, but it's very much an integrated system. Animals are a very important part of permaculture systems in terms of eggs and meat and whatever, but animals also perform important functions. And when we use an animal or some natural process to do a task instead of using a machine, we are always reducing our total environmental impact. It's always better to use a biological solution, if possible, than a mechanical solution.
I guess if you want to change the world, there's that maxim that to change the world you must change yourself. So if you do things by example, it's a much stronger message than just talking.
I suppose it's also a living environment for us, as it's our main form of recreation, and it's a significant contribution to our household economy, so we don't buy anything like what most people buy. We virtually don't go to the supermarket.
Like a visionary, 3 centuries on, he's not only concerned about, the next 10 years or whether the earth will sustain itself over the next 50 years. He's thinking long term. He's thinking 300 years, I reckon.
He is. He's a visionary, and I think that sums up his work and his place in this whole thing.
These trees yield Holmgren between 1 and 2 tonnes of green fodder annually from just 1 hectare of formerly blackberry-infested land at Hepburn in the central Victorian Highlands.
In terms of biodiversity, there's a huge increase in the structural diversity, the number of native birds. There's obviously a huge amount of food produced compared with, well, it was a place where you could pick a few blackberries in the season, I suppose, and graze maybe a couple of goats on the place. Now we support 4 goats without any imported feed. We support a flock of a couple of dozen chooks and half a dozen geese, all grazing on this property, as well as our fruit and nut trees and dams and house. So it's a fairly substantial increase in carrying capacity. clearly, from a permaculture point of view, the commitment is household food production, community food production, regional self-reliance.
I like the down-to-earth lifestyle, and I found that very empowering. To grow your own food and to eat your own food delights me. We've got plenty of things in the dam like yabbies and fish. We get fresh goat's milk from the goats. I make cheese from that, yogurt. It doesn't have to be only do it yourself. What we eat is not only what comes out of our garden, it's from lots of people around us. And we do a lot of bartering, and we do a lot of buying of the fresh and the dry around here. That's a fabulous place for food. Goose, come on!
But to view permaculture as purely a means of achieving household self-sufficiency by sustainable means is to grossly understate its scope and its objectives.
I think there's also a perception in the wider community that permaculture is a system of organic gardening, and it is in reality much more than that. It's really a design system for sustainable land use and livelihood, and really permaculture still has a lot to contribute to the sustainability debate. There's a lot more awareness now, but there's still this drift, this general drift towards more and more consumption, more and more unsustainable methods of production.
I think a lot of people are doing all these little things that have always been part of permaculture. There's a lot more awareness about energy efficient buildings, about composting, about recycling, about waste management. Permaculture was always putting it together in some sort of intelligent system.
It's not easy to measure how many aspects of permaculture have infiltrated mainstream environmental thinking and practice, but it's fair to say its influence has been profound.
I think it's been quite significant in its influence on broadacre agriculture. Just take the two words at its origin, permanent and agriculture, and look around Australia's landscapes. We've had about 10 years of land care, a lot of environmental awareness, and increasingly interest in how we perennialise the agricultural landscape, how we introduce more perennial species. That's a fundamental principle of permaculture, and it's one that's arisen in parallel as we've come to understand more about the Australian landscape.
In the mid-1970s, Bill Mollison, a psychology lecturer at the University of Tasmania, joined forces with Holmgren, then a young student.
Another thing that Bill Mollison made a point of right at the beginning was this idea of learning from nature, looking at the way that nature has arrived at solutions in different environments, and taking a lesson from that.
Raised in Perth by socially radical parents, Holmgren's concern for the environment and his intellectual rigour flourished under Mollison's mentorship. Shortly after, Holmgren's thesis was jointly published as Permaculture 1.
Well, I see Permaculture 1 being published in '78 was right at a crescendo of new environmental solutions emerging in response to the first awareness about limits to growth and then the oil crises of the mid-1970s.
Holmgren's pivotal role in developing permaculture has scarcely been recognised.